In this video, I'm going to write a program to fulfill the requirements of Lab 5. And in Lab 5, you have to write a program that uses at least two arrays and has at least one loop that accesses the data in those arrays. So I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to call it Lab 5. Okay, and I'll get rid of the pop-up thing, and right-click, New Python file. And I'm going to write a drink recipe calculator. So what I'm going to have is a program where you enter a list of ingredients for a drink along with the volume and the proof of each ingredient. So things like orange juice or grapefruit juice will have zero proof, whereas things like tequila may have, I don't know, 60 proof, whatever. And after you've entered all of the ingredients, it's going to come back and list the ingredients for you, along with what percentage of the total volume each ingredient represents. And then it's also going to output the total volume for the whole recipe, as well as the total volume by alcohol. So I'm going to call this recipe, drink recipe. And let's get started on the pseudocode. So I'm going to start at the top and work my way down. So my main module, I'm going to call that recipe calculator. So module, I'll call it drink recipe again. Drink recipe, and it's not going to take any arguments. And then I'm going to just sort of rough this in and then refine it a little bit. So what I want to do is have a function called getIngredients. And I'm not exactly sure what arguments it's going to take yet or what values it's going to return. And then I'm also going to have a module that calculates the totals. And finally, I'm going to have a module to display the recipe. So that's a rough outline or skeleton of my program. Now I have to start refining a little bit. So what do I need to know from the user when they enter the ingredients so that I can pass that into the other modules? Well, I need to know what the name of the ingredient is. So I'm going to declare an array. So I'm going to declare an array of strings called names, and I'm going to put a constant here for max ingredients. So that will be the maximum number of ingredients in any recipe. And let me go ahead and define that constant because I'm going to need it. So this is going to be a global constant, and it's going to be an integer, a whole number. And I'm going to say 256 because that strikes me as being an awfully lot of ingredients. So I have an array for my names. I need an array for the volume, and that's going to be a decimal number, so I'll use real here. And then I'm going to need the proof for each ingredient. And then I need to know how many ingredients the user actually entered. So that's going to be an integer. And I'm also going to need to calculate some running totals, but I'll get there in a second. So when the user calls, or when the program calls getIngredients, I'm going to be modifying these arrays in place by setting the values. So I don't actually need to return the arrays from getIngredients. These are a little different from normal variables. In normal parameters in Python, if I said, for example, get ingredients and I passed in a parameter like count, which is an integer, if I change the value of count inside my module, that's not going to have any effect on count in the outside world. But arrays are a little different because they're actually just pointers to blocks of memory. And so if I pass in names here and then change the contents of the block of memory that names is pointing to, then those changes will be visible in my outside module as well. So objects and arrays are handled a little differently than strings, reals, and integers in Python. So I have to pass in names, volumes, and proofs. Call that proofs for consistency. And then this is going to return the number of ingredients. So now calculate totals. I'm going to have that calculate the total volume, which is going to be the sum of all the volumes for all the ingredients, and also calculate the total volume of alcohol. And that will be the volume of the ingredient times the proof divided by some number. So we'll get to that in more detail later. So I'm going to declare two reals. And so I have the total volume of the recipe and the total volume of alcohol in the recipe. And then in order to calculate these, I need to know the number of ingredients. And I don't need the names to do the calculation, but I do need the volumes. And I do need the proofs. And then this is going to return total volume and total volume alcohol. So that'll calculate my totals. I have an extra parenthesis there, so let me get rid of that. And then finally I want to display the recipe. So I'm going to need pretty much everything here in order to do my final output. So I'm going to need the number of ingredients, the names, the volumes, the proofs, the total volume, and the total volume alcohol. So this is starting to get there. I know this is going to be a module because it's not returning any values, so I have to call this. And now I can start working on these individual modules. So let's start with the get ingredients function. So this is going to be a function, and it's going to return one integer, which is the number of ingredients, and it's called get ingredients. And I'm going to copy this parameter list, and I have to add the types. So this is going to be a string array, and this is going to be a real array, and this is going to be a real array as well. So now I have to flesh this out a little bit. So basically I want a loop here, and I want to say while not done, I'm going to set names, so counter, so I have to have a counter, equal to get name, and I'll fill this in a sec, and then volumes subcounter is equal to, and this will be a real, So let's actually make this get string and get real. And then proofs subcounter is also equal to get real. So now I've gotten the name, volume, and proof of the ingredients. I remember that I've just got one more ingredient. And now what I'm going to do is set done equal to y or n something, and wow. So now I've asked the user to enter all the ingredients one at a time. At the end of each ingredient, I ask, is the user done entering ingredients? And I'm going to store that. It's going to be a Boolean value, and I'm going to store that here, loop back up. If they're not done, then I'm going to go ahead and get the next ingredient, ask them if they're done or not. If they're not done, I do that. When they are done, I drop out of the loop, and then I'm going to need to return the number of ingredients, which is actually just countered here. And that should be it. Okay, so now what I'm going to have here, get string, I'm going to pass in a prompt string. So this is what the program is going to ask the user to get them to type it. So for the name of the ingredient, I'm going to ask the user, what is the name of the ingredient? And I'm going to use that as the prompt in an input string in my program. And then to get a real, I'm going to say, what is the, or let's do this more English-like. So how much plus, and then name subcounter, plus space, do you want? Like so. So what this is going to do is I'm going to type in grapefruit juice for the name of the ingredient, and it's going to say how much grapefruit juice do you want? And then if I enter a number, it'll return the number. If I enter something that's not a number, it's going to give me an error message. You need to enter a number, and then repeat how much grapefruit juice do you want. And it'll keep doing that until I give it a valid input. It'll return the valid input stored in counter. And then for proofs, I want to do something like what proof is names subcounter question mark. So it will ask me for the proof of the ingredients, and then in y or n the prompt is going to be are you finished entering ingredients? y/n question mark, like so. So I have to declare some variables. So I'm using done, which is a Boolean, so declare Boolean done, and I'm going to set this to true to start. So the first time into the loop, done is going to be, I'm sorry, this should be false. So the first time into the loop, done is false, so not done is true, so I ask for the first ingredient, and then I set done to whatever the user entered. And then I also need a counter variable, which I'll start at 0. So no ingredients when you start, and then 1 after the first, 2 after the second, and so on. And I think that's pretty much it for the pseudocode here. Now, let me go ahead and do some quick functions. So I have a function which returns a string called getString. And it takes a string parameter called prompt. And all it's going to do is display the prompt. And then it's going to get the input, so value equal, or actually in pseudocode, input value, and then it's going to return the value. So I don't need to do any type checking or input validation here because anything they type is going to be considered the legal value. And I have to declare my value. And that should be everything there. And let's go ahead and do getReal now. So getReal is going to be a little more complicated. This is going to return a real number, and it's going to take a prompt string as well. So it's going to display the prompts. And then input value. And now what we have to do is we have to have a loop here. So while, and then I'm just going to put English text here because exactly how you do this really is language dependent. But while not value is a real number, I'm going to display an error message. So let's do it like this. Let's say display value is not a number. Please try again. So there's my error message. And then I'm going to display prompt again. And then I'm going to input value again. So if the user enters a valid number, real number, then it's just going to drop down here. And if they enter something that isn't a valid number, I'm going to display an error message and then ask them to enter the number and then get the number and then loop back. And if they've typed something valid, then it'll drop back. Otherwise, it'll repeat the loop until they enter a valid value. So at this point, I should actually have a valid value. So I want to return that. And end the function. So this will be the value as a real. And I'm going to have to do something a little different in Python to make that work. So that's getString, getReal, and I need a y or n. So let's define y or n. And this is going to return a Boolean value. And it's going to take a prompt string. So here I'm going to, oh, actually, I need to declare those parameters up there. I forgot to declare so I'm using an input value, so that's going to be string value. And I think that's the only one. So let's declare string value here. And then I'm going to display my prompt. Input value. And then I'm going to have a loop because I have to check whether they input a correct value or not. So what I'm going to do here is a little different. I'm going to make the condition true. So this basically is going to loop forever. And then what I'm going to do inside the loop is I'm going to check the value of value. And if the user's typed something valid here, I'm going to return true or false. And if they haven't typed something valid, then it will loop back and will continue looping over and over again until the user enters a valid input. So you'll see how this works. If value is equal to capital Y or value is equal to lowercase y, then return true. Else if value is equal to capital N or value is equal to lowercase n, then return false. Actually, these should be capitalized for pseudocode, and this should be capitalized as well. And then if they haven't typed either true or false, then I'm going to display an error message. And reprompt them. And then get my input again. So here's how this works. If they've entered Y, I return true. If they've entered N, I return false. If they haven't returned either of those values, then I ask them to re-input, but I don't return. So when I get to the end while, I loop back. And once again, if value is Y, I exit. If it's N, I exit. If they've entered anything else, I reprompt, and so it's going to continue looping. So that's all the pseudocode I need for get ingredients. Let's go ahead and start implementing. So I'm going to start by implementing get real and Y or N, because those are fairly complicated and I want to make sure I get those right before I continue. So let me do get real first. And I'll declare value is equal to nothing. So I want to set value equal to input prompt. And then while, so here I need to figure out whether it's a valid value or not. So while not valid real value, I'm going to display an error message, and then I'm going to set value equal input prompt. And then that's the end of my while. So if I get here, I have something that is a valid real, so I can return float of value, so the numeric value. So now I have to implement this valid real here, and this is Python specific, so I'm not going to bother with pseudocode for it because it's going to look completely different in a different programming language. So I'm going to use try here. Try float value except, so if this works, then I'm going to return true. And if I get an error trying to convert it to a float, I'm going to return false. So that's basically it for valid real. So I pass in the string. If it's a valid number, I return true. Then that lets me drop out of the while loop. If I return false, then I'm going to repeat the while loop. So let's see if that part works. So I'm going to print get real, and I'll make the prompt message be number of, please enter the number of sides of a triangle. So there's a prompt. And I'm going to go ahead and run this. Please enter the number of sides of the triangle. Not a valid number. 4.3, what is that? That's not a valid number. Is this a valid number? That's not a number either. Okay, so let's try 3. Let's try 3.0. That is a valid number. So it returned 3.0, and that's what it printed. So this seems to be working correctly. Now let's do y or n. So here's my if statement. If value equal y, or, should be lowercase, yeah, or value equal lowercase y, then I return true. Elif value equal n, or values equal to lowercase n, return false, else print error message, and then set value equal input prompt. So that should be it for this one. Let's go ahead and test this. Okay. X, 3, 6, lowercase y is true. Lowercase n is false. Oops, I hit the debug button accidentally. Oh, it's okay. Uppercase y is true, and uppercase n is false. So that all seems to be working correctly. So get string is pretty trivial. Let's go ahead and implement that. Not a very exciting function, but there we go. And now we can write our get ingredients. So this is going to take 3 arrays. Names, volumes, and proofs. And we'll set done equal false. And we'll set counter equal to 0. While not done, colon. Name subcounter equals get string. Oh, did I misspell that up there? Yeah, this should have been get understring. There we go. So what is the name of the ingredient, question mark, and volume subcounter equals get real, how much name subcounter do you want? So this is going to say, this is going to create one big string that says how much grapefruit juice do you want, with spaces before and after grapefruit juice. And then it's going to use that whole big string as the prompt for asking me to enter a number. And then what proof is plus name subcounter. So what proof is grapefruit juice? And then finish with a question mark and a space. And then counter is counter plus 1. And done is equal to y or n. Are you finished entering ingredients? Yes or no? And that should be it for the loop. Then we just want to return counter. And that's it for the function. So now in order to test this, we're going to need 3 arrays. So let me create 3 arrays temporarily, and then I'm going to use them to test get ingredients. So names is equal to string, should be square bracket, double quote, for x in range. Oh, I haven't defined max ingredients yet, so let's go ahead and do that. So there's no real constant in Python, so I'm just going to declare a variable called max ingredients and set that to 256. But then here I can use it for x in range max ingredients, and then I'll do the same for volumes and proofs. And volumes is going to be 0.0, and proofs is 0.0. And then I can print the return value from get ingredients, pass in names, volumes, and proofs. So that should be enough to test. After I've done that, let me go ahead and print names as well, and print volumes, and print proofs, just to make sure that my input worked correctly. So, grapefruit juice, and I'll go for 100. I'm going to do it in milliliters. And what proof is 0? No scotch. And then 20 milliliters. And scotch is, I'm going to say 80 proof. I don't actually know, but one more ingredient. Let's go ice. And we'll go for 50 milliliters of ice. And that's 0 proof. So I'm finished entering ingredients. So I got back 3 ingredients. The names are grapefruit juice, scotch, ice, and then I have 250 some odd initial values. I haven't changed those. And then 120 and 50 for the volumes. And 0, 80, and 0 for the proofs. So this all seems to be working correctly. So now let's go ahead and do the calculate totals, which is going to return total volume and total volume alcohol. So let's write the pseudocode for that first. So this is going to be a function because it's returning two values. And it's going to return a real for total volume and a real for total volume alcohol. The name is calculate totals. And this is going to take a number of ingredients, which is an integer and it's going to take an array of reals called volumes and an array of reals called proofs. So I'm going to want a counter and I'm going to keep a running total of the volume. As well as the total volume of alcohol. And now I need a while loop here. So while counter is less than the number of ingredients, I'm going to set my total volume equal to total volume plus volume subcounter. And so basically for the first drink, I'm going to look at volumes of 0, add that to 0, and then total volume is the volume of the first one. Then I'm going to loop back up, counter will be 1. Haven't done that part yet, but it'll look for volumes of ingredients of 1, which is the second ingredient, add that to the running total, store it, then the third one, fourth one, and so on, until I've hit the last ingredient, and then it'll kick out. So calculating total volume alcohol is a little more complicated. But basically, it's going to be the volume of the ingredients times the proof of the ingredients divided by 200.0. So 200 proof is 100%. 100% of 10 milliliters is 10 milliliters. And then it goes down from there. And then I have to set counter equal counter plus 1, so I'm looking at the next ingredient. And that's it for this loop. And then I want to return total volume and total volume alcohol. So that should be it for the function. So let's go ahead and implement that. Okay, so that's it for the while loop, except counter equal counter plus 1. So return total volume and total volume alcohol. So I have a little red line here. Oh, because I forgot the colon. There we go. All right, so now to test this one, I'm going to actually start hooking up my main module. So let's go ahead and def drink recipe, and that's going to go in there, and this is going to go in there, and that's going to go in there. And then I'm going to set number of ingredients equal to that. Let me go ahead and declare number of ingredients equals 0. And I'm also going to set total volume equals 0, 0.0, and total volume alcohol is 0.0 as well. And then after I've called get ingredients, I can set total volume and total volume alcohol equal to calculate totals, number of ingredients, volumes, proofs. Oh, and I have an extra parenthesis there. Okay, so that should be everything so far. Let's go ahead and see if it works. I'm not actually printing anything, so let me add a print statement here. Okay, so that'll show me whether my results look correct so far. Oh, and I have to call my main program. So, and is 100, 0. Done entering ingredients. So I ended up with 180 milliliters. So 30 plus 50 is 80. I'm sorry. Yeah, 30 plus 50 is 80 plus 100 is 180. So that matches. And then this is 0 proof and this is 0 proof. So all the alcohol is coming from the scotch. 50 milliliters times 80 proof. 80 proof is 40%. So 0.4 times 50 is 20. So total alcohol is correct and total is correct. So it looks like we're on the right track. Now we just have to write display recipe. So let's go ahead and write the pseudocode for that. So this one's just a module because it's not returning any results. And it's going to take an integer number of ingredients and a string array names and a real array volumes and a real array proofs. And I'm running out of space, so it's also going to take a real total volume and a real total volume alcohol. And that should be everything. So I'm going to need another loop here, so I'm going to declare a counter. Equals 0. And I don't need any totals or anything, so I think I'm good here. Let me just go ahead and start on the loop. While counter less than number of ingredients, I'm going to display let's start with volumes of counter, comma, so 30 ml of, and then name subcounter, 30 milliliters of grapefruit juice, and at proofs subcounter, proof. Looks okay. Let's do this. Let's also add ingredient counter dash. That should look good. So that'll say ingredient 1 dash 30 milliliters of grapefruit juice at 0 proof. And that's going to do it for each item in the list. So we just need to set counter equal counter plus 1. And now that we've written our ingredients out, let's go ahead and display. Oh, I don't need parentheses here. It's Pythonish. There we go. So let's display total volume is total volume total alcohol total volume alcohol and then let's go ahead and print the resulting percentage of alcohol in the drink. So let's calculate that separately. So I'm going to declare a real percent alcohol, and then the percent alcohol is equal to 100 times total volume alcohol over total volume. So that should be everything for my output module. Let's go ahead and write the code. So I'm going to start by copy this whole thing. So def number of ingredients, name, volumes, proofs, total volume and total volume alcohol, colon, and then counter is equal to 0, percent alcohol is equal to 0.0, while counter less than number of ingredients, print. And this is pretty close to exactly what I want, so I'm just going to copy this. So that should work as is. And then counter equal counter plus 1. So that's it for the loop. And then percent alcohol equals 100 times total volume alcohol divided by total volume. And then I'll copy these lines too and edit them. So this is print, open paren, close paren, and same thing here. And same thing here. So that should be it for this module. Let's go ahead and call it in our main program. Number of ingredients, names, volumes, proofs, total volume, alcohol. And that matches our parameter list here. And that should be it. So run the program. And let's go for tequila. And input validation still works. So how much tequila do I want? Let's go for 50 milliliters at 60 proof. And let's enter some lemon juice. And let's go for 25 milliliters, 0 proof. And lime juice is 15 milliliters, 0 proof. And triple sec. And let's go for 20 milliliters at 60 proof. And let's go for some ice. And I'll go for 100 milliliters, frosty beverage, 0. And we'll put some sugar. And let's say 20 milliliters of sugar. And that's it. So here's my drink recipe. Oh, I have an extra total here. I forgot to, let's see what I got here. Yeah, I have to take this print statement out. That wasn't in my pseudocode. So that's that line there. So ingredient 0, should actually be ingredient 1. So let's go ahead and change that. Instead of displaying ingredient counter, I'm going to display ingredient counter. Actually, let me increment counter. Well, no, that's fine. So I'm going to display counter plus 1. So that'll go ingredient 1 first, which is what most people expect. So I'll do the same thing in my pseudocode, counter plus 1. So ingredient 1, 50 milliliters of tequila at 60 proof. Ingredient 2, 25 milliliters of lemon juice at 0 proof, and so on. So I have all of my ingredients. Sugar was the last one. And then 50, 75, 90, 110, 210, 230. So total volume's right. And then this is 60 proof is 30% alcohol, so 0.3 times 50 is 15 milliliters. And then 30%, 0.3 times 2 is 6 milliliters, so 15 milliliters of alcohol plus 6 is 21 milliliters. So that's correct. And then 21 divided by 230, that's about 9. 23 would be 10, so 21 looks about right. I could format this to 2 decimal places. Go ahead and do that. That's not going to require a pseudocode change. I'm just going to go ahead and say curly brackets colon .2f curly bracket dot format. Oops. Dot format open paren percent alcohol close paren. And it should be in double quotes. So I think that's everything. Let me run it one more time. A 50, 50, no, B 100, 100, no, C 30, 30, yes. All right, so ingredient 1, 50 ml of A at 50 proof, 100 milliliter, so 50, 180, and this is a quarter of that. I'm not going to do the math. I'm just going to take its word for it. But this actually looks about right because that's 50 milliliters right there, and so I would believe 67 total. And then the output's formatted to 2 decimal places, so it looks good. I think this program's done. The only thing I have to do is add input list and output list. So input list is going to be names, volumes, and proofs, and then output list is going to be names, volumes, proofs, total volume, alcohol, and percent alcohol. Is that what I called it? Yeah, percent alcohol. And I guess just to be technically correct, I'll include counter here as well, since I'm displaying the value of that. So I did forget one thing though. I was going to output the percentage of each ingredient in the final mix so that you can scale up the recipe. So let me go ahead and fix that. I'm also going to output a percent ingredient. And I'm going to change my pseudocode for display recipe. So let's also go ahead and calculate a did I just call that ingredient percent or percent ingredient? I'm going to say percent ingredient. Yeah, percent ingredient. Okay. Percent ingredient. And before I do the output line, let's calculate percent ingredient is equal to 100 times the volumes of counter divided by total volume. And then let's add that. So volumes, counter, milliliters of. So how about ingredient 1 dash percent ingredient, comma, total, colon, and let's change the code now. Percent ingredient is 0.0. Percent ingredient equals 100 times volumes of counter divided by total volume, and then did percent ingredient, comma, of total colon, comma, and then that was volume counter. All right, so that looks good. Now, actually, let me format this as well. So colon.toF dot format percent ingredients, and that line's getting a little long, so I'm gonna go ahead and break it and tab over a little bit. So that should be everything. Let me test it one more time. Let's go 30 milliliters of Kahlua at 50 proof. And 30 milliliters, 30 milliliters of vodka at, call that 180, 100 proof. And 30 milliliters of cream at 0 proof. And I'm done. So 33.33% of total, 50 proof, and that all seems to work now.